website. Wow, a lot of you popping up now. Thank you. All right. We will also be sending all the attendees today a feedback form just to see what you thought about our event. So if you could all complete those and send those back to us, we'd be very grateful. And also just to keep note of what we're posting on our website and what we're posting on the social media for more of these events to come. And for the remainder of this talk, if you could keep yourselves on mute just so we don't get any interference and our speakers can deliver their amazing talks to us. So first off, we'll be hearing today from our in-state president, Asha Mohammed, who's just going to tell you a bit more about our organisation. Then we'll start the session with Arpan Bhatt from Clifford Chance, Sophie Webber from 1 Essex Court, Daniel Leons-Marder from Norton Rose Fulbright, Robert Bike from Slaughter May, Lynne McCafferty from 4 Pump Court, and last but not least, Charlotte Thomas from Brick Court. At the end of this, we'll have a Q&A from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the whole talk, whether that's in the general chat box here or to me privately, and I'll read these out at the end. If we have some spare time, I'd welcome you to come on and turn your camera on and your mic on and ask these directly to our speakers here today. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to our president now. Asha, take it away.
Hello everyone, my name's, as Natalie said, thank you for the introduction. My name's Asha Mohammed. I'm the founder and president of InState. So firstly, welcome to the first professional development series event of the year, of InState's, ever actually at InState. It seems like a long time ago that we launched InState, but it has only been 2.5 months ago. And to have such a fantastic lineup of speakers organised for today is really, really incredible. So really looking forward to the event. Just a bit about InState, why we formed, what is a founding vision. We've all been to state school in our in-channel team, and having gone to a state school, I think a lot of us realise the lack of equality of opportunity and access to corporate careers. And essentially, InState, at the core of the vision, is to bridge the information and access gap between state school educated students and private school educated students. Secondary to that also is kind of creating a wider UK-wide student network, which people can tap into to kind of, help towards applications in corporate careers. The idea of the social network is quite central to InState. It's something that, as a team, we kind of all, think back on in being quite beneficial for all of us when we did apply. And also it's kind of, events like these which diversify and demystify corporate careers generally. So we're 38 students across 20 universities all across the UK. We've got 22 campus ambassadors across the UK. We just had the induction session just an hour ago. In the autumn programs, we have 4 key programs: the peer-to-peer mentorship program, which we're launching this Friday. We have the professional development series, which this event is a part of a wider calendar of events. We have the website opportunities listing, which is a members-only website where members can see opportunities, internships, back schemes, etc., etc. We've come a long way, as I said, in 2.5 months with all of our programs now finally launching. We're just a few steps away from being registered as an official charity. And we're also starting our partnerships and collaborations with the wider companies and firms across the UK. Finishing off, there's a couple of things that I'd really like to leave you with. That is, firstly, to encourage your friends and your social network to join as a member today. We rely on our numbers, and we are stronger as a big membership. So I'm really hoping we get high numbers joining. And encourage people to sign up to our events. Encourage them to sign up to be a mentor or a mentee. I'm really looking forward to the event, and without further ado, back to Natalie.
Thanks for that, Asha. Right, we'll dive straight in then. Arpan, it's over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everybody. As Natalie mentioned, I'm an associate in the banking and finance team at Clifford Chance. So I mainly do general banking work, so really broad, but it basically covers any transaction which involves a financial institution providing a borrower with a loan. So, across all sectors as well, including emerging markets. So we do a bit of work with Ugandan clients, Kenyan clients, Turkish clients, We do a bit of infrastructure financing, so that's financing for roads, power stations, utilities, things like that. We also do restructurings. So, you know, that's lending to a distressed borrower, you know, when they're just struggling to raise cash, and that's just to name a few. And pretty much all of our work is cross-border, so we're often dealing with local counsel as well. But personally, I mainly do acquisition finance work, so that's where banks are providing financing to a bidder in a sale process. So the bidder might use some of their own money to purchase a company, but they'll also usually need a loan, because we're talking about, you know, pretty big sums here, running into the hundreds of millions, if not billions. And so where we come in is, once the banks have agreed to provide that loan, we'll do the work papering it with, you know, loan agreements, security documents, and things like that. I think I enjoy acquisition financing the most because of all the things we do, because, you know, it's really fast-paced work, really high profile. So the most recent deal I worked on was actually the acquisition of Asda by the Issa brothers, who are the founders of you know, EG Group and TDR Capital, and, you know, they acquired Asda for, I think it was about £6.8 billion. So, you know, huge deal, one of the biggest since, you know, the coronavirus hit. And we advised the consortium of banks who are providing that financing. So, you know, working on deals like that is really amazing, and definitely not something I anticipated doing, you know, how many years ago. So my own personal route into the legal profession. So kind of as with all the people working at in-state, I was actually state schooled as well. I did law at the University of Southampton, then went straight onto the LPC, and then the 2-year training contract. So maybe not the most interesting route. Now I'm thinking back, maybe should have taken a gap year or something. But I just note to everyone that isn't doing law or isn't studying law, the split in my intake is about 50% did law, 50% didn't do law. So, you know, I wouldn't be discouraged if you didn't study law, and I think you're probably enjoying your degree more than all of us that did law. And then, so after that, at CC, we do 4 6-month rotations. And so my first one was in the banking and finance team, where I ultimately qualified. My second seat was in the corporate team. And that team primarily dealt with financial institutions. So, you know, advising banks and insurers, really. And that was at the time where everything was up in the air about Brexit. So a lot of the banks and insurers, as you can imagine, were scrambling to get contingency plans in place. So it was actually a really interesting time to be in that team. But, you know, the work I did in that team was very much research of black letter law, churning out advice. I did a little bit of M&A, but, you know, the focus in that team was really, really advisory. And then my third seat was in the capital markets team in Singapore. So I did a mixture of debt and equity, and, you know, threw in some weekend trips and holidays around Southeast Asia for good measure. And I just wanted to note that, you know, from a personal perspective, although, you know, the work I did there was great for my professional development, it was really, really great to leverage the firm's international network to have that experience as well. But I think working in the APAC market was really interesting, because I think the clients and the sorts of deals they do as well are a lot more novel, and people are willing to take a lot more risks with what they do and the sorts of products that they put out. Whereas I think in London, especially when you're dealing with banks, a lot of these people, a lot of these clients kind of know what they want and have done it before and will do it again. So that was a really interesting experience to be out there. And then my fourth and final seat was in the insolvency team. So that was advising administrators and liquidators on, you know, the various processes they were going through. Again, we're very much looking at black letter law, you know, cracking out advice. I actually got to work on the British Steel liquidation, which was really cool. So, you know, we were in court on day one when the liquidation application was being heard, and a lot of the stuff that was handed down in that judgment is now in practitioners' textbooks. So again, really cool experience. So I think it's safe to say that I've had a really interesting and well-rounded training contract. So in terms of the day-to-day professional activities that I do, so as I mentioned earlier, banking and finance is a really transactional team. So when you think about the key documents that you might need when you have a loan in place, you have your loan agreement fundamentally, but then as well as that, the banks will probably want transaction security if there's a bit of a credit risk on the borrower. So you might have quite a few transaction security documents, and to the extent there are other creditors in place. So if, as well as getting a loan, the company's issuing bonds, for example, then you need documents to regulate those creditor relationships. So just in respect of all those key documents, you have a lot of drafting, a lot of negotiating with all the parties involved. And then as well as that, I mentioned a lot of the transactions are cross-border. So there's a lot of managing local counsel, making sure they're fully in the loop, being aware of any local law requirements. I quickly learned that getting anything signed in Germany requires this crazy notarization process where you need to line up the notary like 2 weeks in advance, pay him, really nice sums of money. I kind of wish I was a notary after I found out about that, but they'll need to read it, get it stamped, and all sorts of weird requirements which we wouldn't have here, which made things quite difficult during COVID as well. We also do a bit of advisory work in the team now and then. So, for example, as you might be aware, the LIBOR rates for floating rate loans is being discontinued towards the end of 2021, and a lot of loans are, LIBOR based. So currently, we're advising quite a few banks on, the transition away from LIBOR and sorts of things you can do. So there is that little bit of mix, which is quite nice. And I just want to note as well, I think the good thing about being in a team as big as the one at CC is you always have support, whether it be from the partner leading the deal, a senior associate on the deal, or just other associates in the team, who might just have different experience and are usually always willing to chat. And also the internal resources at law firms are just, amazing, and they're always available. On work-life balance, so I won't lie, it can get pretty busy at times, but as with everything, it's quite cyclical. So for example, before COVID, because it fluctuated quite a bit during, but Christmas and winter would generally be quite a busy time. People were trying to get deals signed before Christmas, but then in the summer, where quite frankly all your clients would take their kids on holiday, it would be a bit quieter. So you do have that balance. And it's not, all work 24/7. So I think that's quite important to remember. And then just lastly on personal anecdotes, I think the one piece of advice I would give you is to really take initiative and pursue every opportunity that you're presented with. And I think you guys are all already doing really well, and more than I was doing at your stage by attending this talk. And hats off to Asha, Natalie, and everyone else at InState for actually putting this together and starting the initiative, because I think it's a really great one. But I think you should also really try to actively network with people and follow up once you do network. So just a personal experience of mine, I remember CC were running I think it was a commercial skills or something workshop in my second year. I hadn't, I'll fully admit I hadn't researched them very much, but I thought I'd just go along and see what it was about. And when I was there, it was actually really interesting. The associates and everyone they brought along really were really engaging people. And I just got chatting to them about what they do day to day, as well as, just getting to know them personally. And one associate in particular I got on with really well. He mentioned that he had to rush off, but he gave me his card and he said if I dropped him an email, we could catch up over coffee in Canary Wharf. And I think having those personal anecdotes and things like that, and knowing the firm that much better, can really help. And I had no pre-existing connection with CC before I joined, so it was really my own research. But I think it just goes to show how those small experiences, and you taking the initiative can really help. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Hopefully I haven't gone over. Natalie, I think I'm okay, right? But I'll pass back to Natalie.
Thank you for that, Arpan. That was very good. Exactly what we wanted to hear from you. We'll now hand over to Sophie.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm a barrister at 1 Essex Court. I specialise in commercial litigation and arbitration. As you might know, barristers are those people who represent clients in court and stand up in court, either in our fancy wig and gown, although that doesn't happen so much in a commercial court actually, and do the sort of advocacy representing clients in court. But actually we do quite a bit of specialist written advice as well. So not everything we do involves court. You might be asked quite a tricky legal questions by your clients that you're asked to answer, or actually very often we act as expert witnesses on English law in foreign proceedings. And so where, for instance, you have a dispute in Germany, or I don't know, in the US, and there's a question of English law, you help the foreign court understand what English law is, and you're the expert witnesses explaining this is the state of English law, and give evidence as an expert, and that can be quite a fun task as well. So I am 2011 call. What that means is I did my pupillage, which is a 1-year sort of training in 2011, 2012, and I've been working since 2012. So I do some of my cases on my own. I do some of my cases as part of a small team. Usually, you know, that would involve a leader, someone who might be a senior, junior, or someone who's taken silk. And I'm sure Lynne will tell you all about taking silk later on. On some of the biggest cases, actually, I work as part of a team of, 3, 4, 5. The biggest team I'm part of at the moment, we're 8 barristers, and that's not necessarily unusual. And the sum sort of at stake, £2 billion, might necessitate actually quite a big council team. So it's certainly not true, that all my work is just on my own and I just sit on my own all day. I work as part of a large team as well. I said I specialize in commercial litigation and arbitration. Commercial law and commercial litigation is actually quite a broad term. So maybe what I should explain a bit is what that actually means, because you have other people on this call who are barristers who also do commercial litigation, but do sort of different areas to what I do. I would say I have a sort of broad standard commercial practice. So if you think about contract law and tort law, that's basically what I do. That can be civil fraud claims, for instance. So a big case I'm doing at the moment involves the Danish Customs and Tax Authority, who has paid out withholding tax to international shareholders in a fraudulent scheme, we say, and we're trying to get that money back. And that's effectively causes of action for fraudulent misrepresentation, conspiracy, and so on. And that's the sort of work that we do. But also I do quite a lot of private international law, so work involving jurisdiction challenges where a case might be brought in England, but actually the defendant says England is not the right forum, I should be sued in Germany, I should be sued in the US, I should be sued somewhere else. And so I do quite a bit of that as well. And then there's maybe more bread and butter sort of standard contract work. You might, if a company gets sold, a share and purchase agreement gets signed. As part of that, all sorts of representation and promises get made. And if it turns out that one of them is wrong, you have a claim for breach of contract, and the client might want to sue for damages. So that's sort of work I do as well. And those SPAs can obviously be in a sort of whole range of industry. So whilst it's always contract and tort, it can really range from acting for banks to acting for manufacturers of warships to, foreign government entities. I also do arbitration. Very often people think that sort of arbitration is a specialist area. I don't really see it that way. Arbitration is just a way of resolving disputes. Now, that doesn't really apply if you do, for instance, ICSID arbitrations, because that's a sort of separate body of treaty law and case law. But take box standard commercial arbitrations, they raise the same issues that commercial law would raise, but it's just a sort of different mechanism. Rather than go to a court that is provided by a state and the judge pays for the state in the courtroom, the parties would appoint arbitrators, or an institution would appoint arbitrators, and parties would pay for that. The advantages are, or it is often said that the advantages are that it's quicker. What is certainly true is confidential. No one finds out about it. No one knows this is going on. And there are various mechanisms to enforce an arbitral award. And actually, maybe post-Brexit, we're going to see a bit more arbitration, because there's an international treaty that a lot of countries have signed up on. So once you get an arbitration award, you can enforce it. Whereas, who knows what will happen to our English judgments. But as part of that, if I do arbitrations, it would be the same. It would sort of be breach of contract claims, fraud claims potentially. I did a big arbitration earlier this year, 3 weeks for breach of a joint venture agreement, but that's sort of bog standard commercial work. Now, lots of people ask, what do I like about commercial work? I like the intellectual challenge. So in the sort of commercial work I do, you often deal with sort of very difficult legal issues for which there might not necessarily be precedent. So that involves a lot of legal research and thinking it through. How can I frame the argument for the client? How can I shoehorn the client's case into an existing principle? At times it involves making some new law. Some of the cases we can be involved in can be very high profile. I mean, most of you will read in the newspaper about sort of the high profile litigation that goes on involving, you know, celebrities. You might be acting for some oligarchs as well. The Danish case I've mentioned is big news in Denmark. It's actually quite big news in the US sometimes as well. The other thing that I think makes commercial law really interesting is the sort of industry that you get exposed to. Yes, it's always contract and tort, but you actually get an insight into different clients' businesses and how different industries work. You might be acting for a supermarket chain 1 week, the next week you might be acting for the manufacturer of warships, and you obviously learn about how that industry works and how those clients operate. And that's something I actually find very, very interesting, and that is something that I get exposed to a lot. In terms of my route to the bar, I wasn't educated in this country. So for those who've been listening carefully, I actually have a slight accent. So I'm not British. I'm also not from the Commonwealth, and English is not my first language. So I went to a state school abroad, and I came over here when I was 19 to study law and French law at King's College, London. I don't have any lawyers in my family. So in that sense, I think I fit quite well in the profile of the organization. I came in contact, I actually didn't know what barristers were until I came to King's, and sort of in my second year started looking around for a career. And I took part in a big mooting competition called the Jessup Mooting Competition. And actually what mooting is, it's basically a mock trial. And I learned that what we did in this mock trial, presenting written and oral arguments, is actually what barristers do. And I had a great time sort of on my feet, crafting those arguments and presenting those arguments. And that's when I thought about maybe having a career at the bar. But obviously, English wasn't my first language. People told me it's very competitive. So I was sort of slightly concerned whether I had the right profile, whether I actually had the right skills. So for a long time, I thought, well, it might just be easier to be an academic. So after my undergrad degree, I went to Oxford and did a postgrad degree in law called the BCL, then stayed for another year and wrote a thesis on jurisdiction issues. And it's only then that I really found out that maybe academia wasn't for me. I didn't really enjoy this sitting around the library thinking theoretically about issues and writing it down. I was sort of thinking back to the thrill of crafting an argument. And it's then that actually some people who taught me on the BCL, who were barristers themselves, encouraged me to apply for mini pupilages, explained the process. And then I went through that process applying, applied for pupillage, was lucky to get a pupillage, did what is called the BPTC. So that's a 1-year course you have to do to become a barrister, and then did my pupillage at 1 Essex Court. Pupillage is a bit like a trainee contract. It's a bit more flexible in the sense that it's less regulated. So what typically happens is it's 1 year long, and in most commercial chambers, you would sit with 3 supervisors. So you don't quite do the seat rotation, although depending on the set you're in, you would get to experience different practice areas. But my set has a sort of broad commercial practice, and the supervisors at the time had a broad practice. So I actually got exposed to all sorts of things that chambers do. And you spend 3 months with each of them. And then at the end of it, sort of chambers decides whether or not you can join. So as I said, that was sort of 8 years ago. Because I'm quite a risk-averse person, I had also done quite a few VAC schemes in some firms, and I had actually lined up a trainee contract as a sort of backup in case the bar didn't quite work. And then when I got my pupillage, I called and I said, actually, I now have a pupillage, so I'll pursue that. Thank you very much. And that went down sort of okay. And there was no question really why I would choose commercial law. I'd enjoyed contract law and private international law at university, and so that was everything I was only ever going to do. In terms of a typical day, there really isn't a typical day. And I think that's what makes the job so exciting. So as I've said, I work on some cases on my own, or I work as part of a larger team. As barristers, you are self-employed. So unlike in a law firm, where as a junior associate, you report up to a partner and you're actually an employee, I've always, ever since I've worked, been self-employed, which means that I'm sort of largely in charge of my own workload and my own workday. So I can decide when I want to start, how I want to finish, when I want to work. That all sounds great in practice, in theory. In practice, there are obviously client constraints. So, it's not like I can roll out of bed every morning at 10 and start work at 12. I do have calls scheduled, clients want to speak to you. So there's obviously constraints on your time as well. Most clients want everything yesterday. So there's obviously pressure there. But, the typical workday for me would be sort of 8:30 in the morning to 8:30 in the evening, sometimes involving, weekend work. Obviously, if you're preparing for a hearing, you work quite a lot, but then after hearing, you might be able to take some time off. The sort of tasks barristers do really depend on the stage in your career. When you're very junior, you would usually do heavy research and first drafts. As you get more senior, you would have people under you who produced first draft. You might then review it, sort of pass it on to the silk. You might help the silk with preparing for oral hearings. You might get to do some advocacy yourself at the oral hearing. So the tasks are really varied, but there's a lot of sitting down, reading, and a lot of drafting, actually. And being in court is, in commercial work, not necessarily the biggest part. Although in big cases, it's not unusual to have 3, 4, 5, 6-week hearings. The big Danish case I mentioned, we have 2 preliminary issues next year. So we're going to have a 1-week trial in March, a 6-week trial in October, and then the main trial in January 2023, listed for a whole year. So I'll then spend a whole year in court, but we'll probably also spend 2 years preparing. So in terms of work-life balance, variable. There's obviously, you're self-employed. If you don't work, you don't earn. Most of us are very driven. So naturally, you tend actually to work probably a bit too much. Work is, I think, there's less of a cycle of work, I think, than if you do transactional work in a law firm. Typically sort of July, December can be very busy with lots of hearings before the summer. August can be very quiet, but it can also be very busy. So it really depends. Notable experiences. Well, I think I'll leave that to sort of the Q&A session. But what I would say is, and really sort of what the previous speaker says, is believe in yourself, research the bar if you're interested in the bar, and ask for help. There's lots of schemes out there that, in particular, the commercial bar is now sort of putting into action, trying to make this accessible to everyone. And I should say there are no obstacles to people from different backgrounds joining the bar. And the bar, in particular, the commercial bar, is very open and wants to be open to everyone. So in particular, the commercial bar has launched mentoring schemes for people from underrepresented backgrounds. My own chambers has launched a mentoring scheme for women who, believe it or not, are actually quite underrepresented at the commercial bar. So there's plenty of opportunities, plenty of information out there, and I would encourage you to go and look at it. Now, I've had a question, so I don't know whether I'm meant to answer that now or later. I think I'm going to leave it until later, because I don't see why the question should necessarily sort of be addressed to me. Others might be well placed to answer that too.
Thank you for that, Sophie. Yeah, we'll deal with that question at the end. Just a reminder to everyone, feel free to put your questions in there now, and we'll go through all of them at the end. Daniel, you're up next.
Thanks, Natalie. So yeah, I'm Daniel. I'm a newly qualified, as in about a month ago qualified, associate at Norton Rose Fulbright. And I don't really want to say specialise, given that I qualified a month ago, but I work in a team specialising in financial services regulation, and I will talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to start by saying how great I think InState is and what it's doing, and just to see something like this that's being run by the people that it's intended to help, which isn't something I think you see a huge amount. And I think that's great, because there are lots of great groups out there, but most of them are being run by people who do incredible work, but weren't in this position particularly recently. And I think that gives you something that you can contribute that others perhaps are farther away from. So in terms of my journey, it was relatively straightforward, apart from I ended up going to university quite late. I ran a very small business when I was about 18, 19, that was in the sort of jewelry trade, and I was also a professional musician. So I have probably a background that is less common among commercial lawyers. I don't think that in itself has been difficult, despite the fact that I was applying for training contracts slightly older than many people are. I think it took me a while to learn that I could be open about that, and I could talk about X bit of music or X bit of jewelry or fashion related knowledge, and that's actually something that will help you, because it will give people something to talk about with you. But other than that, I studied philosophy and comparative literature at Royal Holloway, and I did a vacation scheme at Travers Smith in my final year, and then began a training contract there in September 2018, just before my 27th birthday. So that's my journey, really. It's not the most exciting. I largely chose it, and I think this is probably a good way to do it, by sitting down and thinking about what I wanted from my career. And that wasn't just about the sort of work. I had a good idea that I maybe wanted to be a litigator, not sure. Maybe wanted to be a corporate lawyer, not sure. Don't really know what financial services law is. So Travers looked like a good firm. It seemed like it had a really nice culture, and I thought that was important. So I took a punt and did a vacation scheme, and just sort of ended up there, and had 2 very happy years there. And then I joined Norton Rose last month. In terms of what a regulatory solicitor actually does, I think there are a few ways that we make ourselves useful to our clients. Our team is very unusual in that we have solicitors who do what I'm going to talk about, but we also have a whole team of compliance professionals that do slightly different work, looking at things like applying for authorizations, that's to the regulator for permission to do certain things that you have to be authorized to do, and who work on large review projects. And then we also have this team called government relations, and their job is basically to know what legislators in Europe and here, and what regulators are talking about, what they're thinking about doing in the next sort of 2 to 3 to 5 years, maybe even further away than that. So our team doesn't function in the same way that I think that many teams in the city do. We have these sort of 3 arms of which we try to advise our clients. And those clients tend to be banks, investment banks, merchant banks, etc., investment funds and other asset managers, so people who are managing the money of other people to generate returns for them, payment systems, which we're all using every day or most of the time, and then that includes a lot of fintech businesses. We advise other fintech businesses that do things like cryptocurrency, which please don't ask me any questions about, because I'll embarrass myself horribly. And then other financial services business, so we do bits of insurance work and all sorts. And that is, as I'm sure you can imagine, actually quite a broad range. So people specialize pretty early on. Our team has very little hierarchy, which is wonderful and terrifying as a junior. It means that you really do get to do a lot of work, and you really do get to take on a lot of responsibility. But it does mean that you, unfortunately, will have moments where you have imposter syndrome. You will have moments where you are, having a bit of worry about it. But what it does mean is that you have an incredibly rewarding experience in your work, because you are giving real advice pretty early on, and you do feel very valued. Just a bit more about what we actually do. I think there are 3 ways that you could look at it. The first I don't really know anything about, because it's almost a separate team within our team. And they are people that do contentious financial services work. So that's often when one of our clients is being investigated by a regulator, or even if they've just been asked questions about certain things that have happened by a regulator, or when there is general litigation that's happening in a financial services context, and they do all of that, and it's not something I know a tremendous amount about. The other two are sort of trends in the sort of work we do, and this is sort of, you know, our bread and butter. A regulatory lawyer will spend a lot of time advising on regulatory change. It's an area of law which changes incredibly quickly. There is new legislation coming out all the time, and half of the challenge / half of the fun is trying to keep on top of it. So a lot of our work is taken up advising our clients on how this bit of regulation is going to affect them. And it means that you really do need to stay on top of things. You spend quite a lot of time on know-how. So probably every year or two, you have an event which is spoken about by people who were practicing at the time as some sort of apocalyptic event. So in 2018, on the 1st of January, we had this big thing called the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive 2, or MiFID 2, which came in. And if you speak to anyone who was qualified around that time, they will talk about the massive rush and, you know, clients calling up on New Year's Eve saying, we haven't really thought about this MiFID 2 thing. Is that, do we need to be doing anything about that? Well, it turns out, yes, you do. And you probably have left it a little bit too late, given that the whole team is with their families or down the pub. So that's a big part of it. And, that's probably the thing that keeps people going, just because it is so interesting to constantly be having these new challenges. And it can also mean that, that side of work is also advising when people want to start new businesses or new branches and things like that. The other side of it is that our clients are, if they're regulated, constantly pushing up against regulation. And despite the fact that we have generally quite cooperative regulators who try very hard to provide good guidance and, great draftsmen that try very hard to draft things clearly, there's a huge amount of ambiguity that happens just as a result of the different activities that people are doing, the ways they're doing it, and the fact that, that there is just, for every question, it will come up for the first time at least once, well, only once. And that means that a lot of the questions we get, there are no answers for. So a lot of our work is really trying to think about, well, we've not really seen this before. How would a regulator look at it? Why have they got this piece of regulation in place in the first place? Is it about consumer protection? Is it about keeping markets stable? If they don't do things this way, are they going to create risks that sort of spill out across the financial system? Is it about conduct in the business? So should they be worried about the office culture? Is there sort of suggestions that people aren't being paid? Their bonuses aren't being calculated in a way that's conducive to them making sound decisions that are best for consumers, or perhaps there's discrimination going on. You really need to think about, why is this regulation here, and what does the question, how is the question affected by that? And it really means that you spend a lot of time saying, well, we think it's probably this, but this has never been asked before, and we say that multiple times a week. I think that's the whole part of the whole fun of being a regulatory lawyer. That's really how it works. You answer novel questions, and I suspect it's possibly interesting in a similar way to the advisory work that the barristers do, although possibly in a much less complicated level. The other way that we work, and I'll finish this very quickly, is that there are a lot of businesses that are teetering on the edge of being regulated. So you'll hear us talking about the regulatory perimeter. That's just this idea that some things are regulated and you have to go to the regulator to get a permission to do them, and some things aren't. And there are a whole bunch of businesses that the regulators are looking at thinking, well, we probably want to do something about this at some point. And they will go away and they will pester the Treasury, and they'll pester other arms of the government and say, there's a risk to consumers here, or there's a risk to markets there. Can we please regulate this? So a lot of the work on the sort of fintech side and the crypto assets side, and also the lending side, so lending to small businesses, regulators are looking at this very, very carefully and thinking about what they need to do to protect the stability of the economy and to protect consumers. And a lot of our advice is looking several years in the future saying, you're not really caught by this now, but if you want to be very conservative, you need to think about what the regulators are going to be doing. So some of our clients aren't regulated, and that's another nuance to what we do. I said I'd talk about work-life balance. I will try to be quick. It's very changeable. At the moment, our life is being made very hard by Brexit. So I think a lot of lawyers in the city at the moment are working quite long hours with people who have been really caught up by all the disruption that's come from COVID, who are, who sort of woke up in September and in October thinking, well, we've only got a few months until we don't know what happens at the end of transition period. What can we do to plan for that? So we've had a tremendous amount of activity on that front. But I really do think that partners and senior associates and most firms in the city really do care about you having a life and you being able to live outside of work. And in my experience, when you have those tough hours, people do, people take note and they try and make sure you're not being overworked. I said I'd be brief. I've not been brief at all. For advice, it's a real cliche, but you're doing more than I was doing by bothering to turn up to this, at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. Just stay engaged, network, talk to people, and try and accumulate, knowledge and awareness that will mean that you can have, really good conversations when you go to law fairs and when you have VAC schemes. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions and I'll try my best to stumble through them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. We'll now move on to Robert.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I don't get out much at the moment, so this is quite exciting. I am, just to be clear, in my office. I shouldn't be here, but the honest truth is, I think we need to be honest about this. For my mental health and for being locked down for a huge number of months and for potentially looking at being locked down for another X number of months, I kind of have taken the opportunity to be in the office when I can be at this point. We're saying to our people that if they wish to be, they can. The advice is that if you can work from home, please do so. And most of our people are doing that. But equally, we're providing the option because we get it. We get that this is really, really tough for a huge number of people. I don't know why I've shared that with you. Oh, partly because I've got some ballet steps on the whiteboard just behind me, and also presumably stacks of confidential information behind me as well, which I'm sure is maybe you shouldn't record. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I work at Slaughter May. Actually, let's start again. 7.2% of children in the UK attend independent schools. 15% of pupils aged 16 and over attend independent schools. Yet, in a report that we collaborated with and a number of other firms collaborated with, only produced last month, 47% of those firms' associates went to independent schools. Now, at Slaughter May, we happen to have a slightly better number. That number is 35%, who are from state education in terms of our associate pool. But that's pretty pathetic overall. So I applaud anything that we can do and anything that we can get involved in these sort of initiatives. And the truth is, why is this important? It's important because we are, every single organisation here, and indeed every single barristers' chamber as well, is only as good as the people. I mean, the computers and the cameras and all the rest of it make a degree of a difference, but we are only as good as our people. And actually, if we don't have a diversity of people and a diversity of thought and diversity of background, that's pretty useless and pretty hopeless. So I will talk till the cows come home about the change that is needed. Will I achieve anything? I don't know, but I might die before that, because I also have realized how old I feel compared to everybody else. I went to the University of Bristol. I studied law and Italian law, spent a year or so, thank you, Ryan, it's very exciting. Spent a year or so in Siena as part of being in Italy at that point. Got a job at Slaughter May. I did a number of vacation schemes. Those were the days when pretty much anyone could get a vacation scheme, and that included me. And they very sweetly offered me a job. And a number of people say to me, what is it that kept you at Slaughter May? And the answer to that is, nobody has yet asked me to leave. And that is true. I mean, I don't think that being a partner of a law firm is anything particularly special or particularly exciting. It's a great job, otherwise I wouldn't bother doing it, but it's no more impressive than anything else. I've got a number of colleagues from my intake who've left, who've gone off to do other things. I just happen to be the least inventive person and left standing. And I do stand, by the way. I have a standing desk. I work in the corporate and finance area. You're all really confused, aren't you? You're all sort of sitting there scratching your head going, what is going on? And Lynne, don't worry, we'll be here in a minute and there'll be much more normality, I promise you, I hope. I work in the corporate and financing team at Slaughters, but it doesn't really matter what I do. I mean, I have clients that range from Tata Steel to Cement Mexico to the government, to Asda. I advise the government on the Northern Ireland Brexit situation. I've advised on carbon capture. I've advised on asset finance for ships, for aircraft, all sorts of random things. Joint ventures in the Gulf for oil drilling, a joint venture in Angola, Gianfranco Ferré on his fashion housey thing. Not that I'm particularly fashion housey, but there we go. And you've heard actually from others what they really do. What I'd like to just touch on for 2 or 3 minutes is what is commercial law. Because actually, when you get to interview and when you get to talking about this, that is the key question. It's not exactly what we do, but it's what is commercial law. And I think that really interesting point is it is anything to do with business. It is anything to do with corporate entities that are commercially looking at their interests and looking at how they manage those interests. And if that turns you off and you think that's just the most boring thing possible and all businesses should be shut down and we should nationalize the entire world, that's a perfectly legitimate view, but it may be that you don't necessarily want to work for those businesses going forward. But if actually it kind of excites you and interests you how, one of my clients, Hovis, how bread is delivered each day. The fact that at 4 o'clock in the morning, there are 60 bakeries across the UK who produce, I know it's amazing, isn't it? You think it's just produced once a week, actually, Hovis, because it's like plastic. They are recording this, aren't they? They deliver it across the UK. How do you do that with the logistics? What do you do? Why is it delivered? Who is it delivered to? How many pallets get delivered to each place? What do they use the lorries for after they've delivered it? Why do the lorries sit there for probably around 60% of the time without being used? Why does that excite me? I don't know. I've got no idea, but I think it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting when you look at, say, I had the privilege of being involved in Thomas Cook recently, and you look at the complete disaster that was in fact Thomas Cook, but you stand alongside people whose jobs are under threat, and you work with them to try and save the company. And although you manage not to save the company, or you don't manage to save the company, you admire those people because in fact, for the last 5 days of their employment, all they did was focus on getting the people back from their holidays. People doing the right thing in the face of complete disaster. Now, we can argue till the cows come home as to what they should have done, how it should have been done, etc., etc. But that's what we get to do. I think all of the speakers on this call, we get to stand beside companies and corporates trying mostly, I think, to do the right thing, trying mostly to make the right decisions and trying to do it legally as opposed to illegally. And you get, and the privilege that we have, or I have, is I sit beside CEOs and chief financial officers of companies and chief operating officers, and they say, what do you think? And I go, I've got no idea. Actually, I don't say that, sorry. Internally, that's what I say. And then I come out with something considered and thoughtful, like, that's a very good question. There are a number of options. And someone talked recently about imposter syndrome. I mean, I still get this every day as I sit with clients and they turn around to me and go, you must have experience of this. And I go, well, if I had experience of this, if you had experience of this, I wouldn't be advising you. And if I had experience, I had some experience of this, but let me tell you what your options are and what the thoughts are. I still get patronized by people on the other side, and I'm sure I still patronize people on the other side from time to time. Notable moment was, I remember in a restructuring, I'd been there for 5 days, I was sitting in a darkened room in Madrid when the partner, I was just made a partner at that point, and people could tell. And I was in sort of short trousers and kind of hoping for the best. And the partner from the other side was 20 years qualified at a very significant, what's it called, Magic Roundabout firm. And he came to me and he said, Robert, it's probably the first restructuring you've done, isn't it? And I went, no, I mean, clearly, yes. And he said, well, would you like me to explain to your client how these processes work? And I said, well, I'm sure that would be fascinating because it would help me to learn something as well. So he started explaining how the banks run the process and what happens and all that. And I said to him, in the middle of what he said, I said, that is incredibly helpful. But what's really interesting is we have absolutely no intention of running the process like this. It seems that you run according to some sort of book that you've been looking at. My client, who's sitting next to me, has no intention of running it like that, but it's been really interesting talking to you. And we'll be here for another 8 days, and we were. So we get to do exciting things. Now, some of them are painful, and some of the work and the work-life balance point is a really difficult one. And I have a slightly weird view on work-life balance, and I will sort of finish with this one, I think. The phrase work-life, and look, make of this what you will. I am slightly odd, I know. The phrase work-life balance is designed to imply that when you're at work, you're not having a life. I think that's a fair question. Actually, I spend a lot of my time at work, and I would not like to think that whilst I'm at work, I'm not having some sort of pleasant time with my colleagues, discussing things, being intellectually stimulated, finding things challenging, chatting over coffee, over Zoom, whatever it might be. A lot of my life, and I know this will sound sad to all of you, but a lot of my life happens at work. We sort of have to accept that, because otherwise we're writing off, even if you do a normal job, you're writing off 8 hours of your day as not life. The question, which is much more interesting, is how do you continue to maintain an equilibrium? And to me, that's about continuing to discuss what you are doing, to continue. So my wife and I sit down every 6 months and work out whether this is still working, not the marriage, but actually the balance that we've achieved. And if it's not working, and if I need to adjust, and the truth is she's a much better gauge of that adjustment than me, because I'm a workaholic. Every single person on this screen is moderately focused, borderline sort of compulsively excited. And the truth is that when we're presented with work, we like it. Otherwise we wouldn't be doing this job. And there will be more work to come, and you have to work out when you stop doing that, and when enough is enough, and when you can leave it till tomorrow to do that work tomorrow. And every 6 months I sit down with my wife and she said, yeah, you've got it wrong at the moment and we need to make some adjustments. And either I do that and I stay married, and I've done that for about 27 years now, or I don't, and I'm going to be in trouble. And I know what's much more important to me, which is not my job. It is actually my family and my relationships and all the rest of it. And that's the last point I would make, which is please, please, please ignore all the fluff that goes with commercial law. Whilst you're making this decision, ignore the ridiculous salary, the gym membership, the jelly babies in reception, the crazy umbrellas, the fact that you can tell your mum and dad you work in a magic roundabout or whatever it is firm. But actually think about whether it's commercial law that you are interested in, and then think about the firm, or think about the track, or think about being a barrister, or think about whatever it might be. But that is the first question. Please don't have your head turned by all the other rubbish that goes with it. Because actually, in 5 years' time, when you look back, that will not be the things that really stick with you. Right? 1956. Natalie, have I gone over time?
No, it's completely fine. We can eat into our question time. No worries.
I started late, in my defense.
Completely fine, completely fine. Also appreciate the magic roundabout reference, although I think some of us might be a bit young for that. I'll now hand over to Lynne.
Thanks very much, Natalie, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening. I went to a state school too, and I feel very passionately about the importance of these sorts of initiatives. And I think somebody touched on it earlier, that the key thing is that if you go to a state school, you may not necessarily have the access to lawyers, particularly barristers and magic circle or magic roundabout partners that people who went to independent and public schools perhaps had. So I think these are such important events, and it's great that you've all come this evening. So I'm a barrister, like Sophie and like Charlotte, who we'll be hearing from soon. I was called to the bar in 1997, which is probably before some of you were born, so I'm probably older as well than Robert, so so I certainly feel as he does looking around these screens. And I'm at a commercial chambers called Four Pump Court, and I think what's become really clear this evening is just how wide the field of commercial law is, and we've heard really fascinating stories from different speakers about the work that they do every day, and I find that really interesting. My focus within commercial law is on the slightly more technical side of it in some ways, in that I specialise in construction law, professional negligence, technology law and energy. So I'm usually to be found either in the Technology and Construction Court, which is a division of the High Court, or often in international arbitration. And about between 50% and 2/3 of my work at any one time will be international of some description. I do a lot of work in the Middle East because there's lots of stuff being built there. The work I do, I find really fascinating. I think it's so difficult to sum up what commercial law is because it covers so many different areas. But I think one thing that all the different areas have in common is that contract law and tort law are our main building blocks. And the law that's involved in commercial law tends to be really intellectually stimulating and interesting. And particularly the construction industry is very litigious. So there's lots of case law being made in construction work all the time. I find that fascinating. But for me, actually, what I found the most interesting is not actually the law, but the factual side, the technical side of doing commercial law. And like Sophie said, I think what's really interesting is you find out so much about your client's business. And for me, my clients are often construction contractors or architects, engineers and their insurers, or they can be developers. And this can involve projects all around the world, from huge projects like renewable wind farms down to smaller domestic projects like refurbishing an old building, turning it into a hospital. So it's a real wide range of subject matter that we deal with. And every case is different. Every case has technical challenges that you have to get on top of. And I would say one of the key things on the work that I do is to really keep a curious mind and constantly ask your clients and your technical experts about the issues and to try to understand it. So really, I find construction and commercial law generally something new every day, and it's never boring. My route into the profession is probably similar to some people on the call. As I said, I went to a state school. I'd never even met a lawyer, let alone a barrister, until I did a mini pupillage. So I did English as my first degree, and I absolutely loved it. And I would echo what I think Arpan said earlier on, that loads of people at the bar, as well as I'm sure at solicitors' firms, did a degree other than law for their first degree, undergraduate level. And I would say about 50% of people in my chambers did non-law degrees. So after English, I did some work experience, some mini pupillages during that time, and found out a bit about the bar. And then after English, I did a law conversion course, which was 1 year at City University, and that was a fantastic introduction to law and really very rigorous course, and I found that really enjoyable. And then I did the bar exams, what's now called the BPTC. And then of course pupillage after that. And what I would say is, so I guess you're all on the call because you're thinking about doing commercial law and interested in that. But I would say really keep an open mind about what kind of law you might want to do. And certainly when I came to Four Pump Court, there's a range of different areas of law that they specialise in. And I had no real set idea about which of those I wanted to specialise in. But what I found is that I ended up doing quite a lot of construction law because I was a junior to a couple of barristers, and I got to know their solicitors, and then that built up my CV, and I was then able to talk slightly more informed way about construction, and you just build it up, and it grew from there. So for me, it was chance in many ways. So I would say keep an open mind about that. In terms of my day-to-day activities, I think, as it's become clear from what all the speakers have said, it's so hard to describe a typical day, because the beauty of commercial law is that it is very varied and quite unpredictable. So I have a lot of written work where I'll be drafting particulars of claim or defences in an ongoing case, or I may be drafting an advice on an area of law, or a particular problem that's come up for the client. I may be in the middle of a big case where we're working through the different stages of it and lead up to the trial. So reviewing draft witness statements, or dealing with expert reports, or I may be preparing for trial at this stage of my career. So as I said, I was called in 1997 and I took silk in 2018. So often the trials that I'm doing now tend to be quite long. So, they may last a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And so often I'm in the middle of trial preparation, which is very intense, but incredibly stimulating. I find trial preparation, the focus that you need, and the pressure and the adrenaline is exciting and stressful, sometimes all at the same time, and so it's very difficult to say what a typical week is. The work that we do at Four Pump Court, we make sure that the junior members of chambers get into court regularly when they start off. So we get a balance between them working as juniors to more senior people and doing their own work in court, where they may be doing some insurance work, even road traffic accidents, things like that, just to get them into court, because we think it's really important that they learn courtcraft from the very start, and that they make their mistakes in the county court rather than in the High Court or the Court of Appeal, and can build up those skills and really that will carry them through their whole career. So it is quite a kind of difficult job to predict in many ways. You may start off at the beginning of a week thinking you're going to be doing all this written work and ticking things off from your to-do list, but then Monday lunchtime something will flare up in one of your ongoing cases, and suddenly the whole week is thrown out of kilter. So you are very much reactive to what your clients want. We're a service industry, and we have to do everything we can to help our clients when they face challenges and difficult problems. So as a result, it often is quite difficult to manage the work-life balance, and I was pleased to hear Robert speaking so candidly about it, because I think often at careers talks we maybe don't want to put the students off, but the reality is that in commercial law there will be times when you will have to work really, really hard, I think the work-life balance is something I find it, however many years, 23 years on, it's something that I'm still trying to work out, and sometimes I get it right and sometimes I really get it wrong. But often it's out of my control, and I try to do what I can to keep it in control. But if you've got a big trial, there's nothing you can do other than work really hard, because you've got to do your best in that trial for the client. And actually, I agree completely with what Robert says. I find that that's a really exciting part of my life, and I really enjoy it. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction. And I think the times then when you can take a breather and say, right, got that trial out of the way, I'm now going to take some time off. You enjoy that all the more, and then you catch up with your friends and family and all the things that you like doing. So, and I think the beauty of being at the bar is that you have a bit of control over that. I think, as Sophie said, that's subject obviously to clients, and sometimes you've just got to get on that call and help deal with things. But you do have the the freedom sometimes to say, okay, a trial has settled, I've now got a free week, I'm going to take this week off and just do what I want to do. So so it definitely, it goes in phases. Sometimes it's up and down, but you do have to be prepared to work hard if you want to make a successful career at the commercial bar. And just, I think that's me run out of time, but just very, very finally, just to give a little bit of advice at the end, I would really echo what others have said about getting out there and getting information about commercial law, about the bar or solicitors firms, whatever it might be, and you'll be surprised by how keen people are to help, whether it's barristers, solicitors, at all different levels of the career. We all know how much help we got from key people in our lives. And I think actually people are very generous with their time and recognise that you need a lot of information when you're starting out to work out if this is a career for you and how to go about getting to where you want to be. But also you need a lot of information to work out that very steep learning curve of how to make it, how to work your way up those rungs of the ladder. So always ask for help and search out ways to speak to people about what they do. So thanks very much, Natalie, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Lynn. And last but not least, we've got Charlotte.
Hi, good evening. I think my time has technically expired already, so I'll try to be quick. I have the benefit of coming after everyone else, and in particular after Sophie and Lynne, who have done a great job of introducing life at the commercial bar in particular. I'm really pleased to be here. I don't have the statistics to hand, unlike Robert, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that the bar in general and the commercial bar in particular is just about the least diverse profession there is. I think we have about the worst stats for private schools of all professions. The commercial bar also has a big gender problem, a big race problem. The good thing is we've kind of really woken up to it. Like, we've always talked the talk, but my sense is in the last few years, people are really starting to walk the walk. Sophie's mentioned the mentorship scheme that my chambers participates in as well. And we're all sort of going out and doing all these like outreach events. It's quite difficult as barristers because we're self-employed, so it's a lot harder to organise us, I think, into doing these kind of, good, worthwhile shows mobility events. But people are now really realising it's important. So I think it's kind of an exciting time, and as Lynn said, it means everyone's really conscious of these issues, and if you reach out and talk to people and want support, I think you will find you're knocking an open door, really. So that's the one thing I want to say is, like, please do try. We're really, really keen to have you. But let me sort of quickly go through my sections, talk about what my life is like, how I got here. So my name is Charlotte Thomas. I should have started with that. I'm at Brick Court Chambers, which is one of the magic roundabout sets, I guess. I'm 2013 cool. You know what that means now because you've heard Sophie and Lynne talk about it. I'm in my 6th year of practice now. I am down on the list as talking about EU competition law in particular. So one of the reasons I chose my chambers is because I do all the kind of bread and butter commercial work. I do a lot of, there's a contract, there's usually an international element, things like civil fraud or SBAs, international arbitration. But I also do a kind of slightly wider range, and then I get to do the work that is kind of crossover within different spheres. So I do EU law. I'm not quite sure what that's going to mean next year. I have qualified as an Irish barrister just in case. For the moment, it means I do quite a lot of interesting regulatory work. So financial services, regulatory work, pharmaceuticals, regulatory work, all sorts of really data breach, data protection. So all sorts of really interesting areas. Where it's called EU law because that happens to be the source of the law, but in reality you're talking about very interesting kind of swathes of regulation where you're either working with a regulator or suing a regulator or being sued by a regulator, or you are bringing a kind of private claim, maybe there's damages arising from that interesting regulatory context. So it's a kind of very broad chat. I find it very enjoyable because you're applying a set of skills to all sorts of different regulatory and factual contexts. I also do competition law, which again is kind of very enjoyable because it draws on those different types of skills. Competition damages claims are in essence just commercial claims. They're sort of, tort claims for damages that have been inflicted on someone by a cartel, for example, but they're claims that affect an entire market. So you get to think about how a whole market works and operates. You work with economics experts to try and think about how the market functions. You work with subject matter experts to sort of understand how that market operates. So that kind of thing I find very enjoyable. I also do public law, realistically sort of commercial public law. So usually there'll be a company who has been affected by a government decision. And again, there's probably an EU element in the kind of work I do. So I don't do the kind of, super cool public law, but I enjoy it, and it intersects extremely well with the commercial practice. So one of the things I wanted to emphasise is that when you think about commercial law, although very often it will involve contract and tort, as being said, you can have a practice that spans quite a few different practice areas, and they can cross-fertilise very effectively. Find it very stimulating, and I also find it makes me a much better lawyer to have these different areas that help me to think about things more flexibly, and to sort of take lessons that I've learned from a competition case, say, into a commercial case and help to be more creative. So I find that very enjoyable. So my second message would be, at least at the start of your career, you can be quite broad, and you don't necessarily have to think, I'm going to be a financial services person and specialise immediately. That probably is the benefit of the bar in particular, as opposed to solicitors' firms. You get that little bit more flexibility in terms of choosing what you want to do. I endorse a lot of the things that have been said so far about commercial law and why it has the potential to be a particularly enjoyable area. There's actually a lot of teamwork in commercial law. You work as teams with counsel, teams with solicitors. Because a case is usually worth a lot to your client, they're willing to pay you to sit there for a whole week and think about an interesting point. So it's extremely intellectually satisfying because you can really do something in detail, do it properly. And that's very enjoyable. Because things are often interesting in the details. So describing a case in the abstract might not sound fascinating, but once you drill down and start to understand a client's business, or perhaps you work with an expert in order to understand their evidence about how a particular plant operated or something like that, that again can be very interesting. One bonus I've not heard mentioned so far is that if you do commercial work as a barrister, you then have capacity to take on really interesting pro bono cases as well. So you could sort of cross-subsidise your work. So for example, I'm doing a really interesting financial services judicial review for a load of bond holders who want money from the FSCS. They can't afford to bring a claim on their own. It's a really interesting, unusual case, very sort of unusual procedurally. We're going to make some law. It's all quite fun. And I do kind of lots of like advisory, kind of international human rights type work as well, which I get to choose to do fascinating things like that. And I don't need to worry about the fact that I'm not being paid for it because I have my commercial cases as well. So for me, that's quite a big bonus of commercial law, actually, that you can sort of have a lot of choice over what you do because you're not worried about chasing the money. So that's why commercial law. Why the bar as opposed to solicitors, I guess, but also any other kind of lawyer. The self-employment is a real draw. You have a lot of control over at least the cases you take. Once you've agreed to take a case on, you sort of lose control because you've then agreed to be there for the client. You've agreed to be responsible for their interests. That's great because it feels it's a big deal to have someone trust you with their interests and feel that you're the person who's sort of advising them when they're turning to you, but it's a big responsibility. It means if they need you, you have to be available. It's very, for me, I enjoy a lot that I'm involved in developing the law. So being involved in litigation and big cases where something's going to happen that will develop the law and that will set a new precedent for future cases, I find quite motivational. It's a really nice thing to be involved in. Feeling like you're part of a system that promotes the rule of law, even when you're acting for a client you don't necessarily agree with. Feeling that you're acting as part of a system that sort of keeps the whole show on the road and makes sure that everyone is acting fairly and trying to treat each other properly, for me is also really very enjoyable and quite motivational. I would also say, I noticed one of the questions is about the competitive nature of commercial law. I think that's really lovely about the bar. Oh gosh, I'm being told there's a time limit. I think what's very lovely about the bar is collegiality in chambers. So you work as a team with a silk. They're very conscious that they were in your shoes once. I learned masses from my leaders. I work with some really brilliant people who I admire hugely. And there's a lot of support in chambers. I think we all know that we work quite hard and it can be a hard job sometimes. And people really support each other and are very ready with advice in a way that's really wonderful and is a real sort of credit to the profession. That's something I find really motivating and very enjoyable as well. In terms of my routine, very quickly, I study law. You don't have to, as people have said. I did postgraduate degrees. You don't have to. One thing I would say from my vantage point of being 6 years in is life is long. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, do I really have time to do that extra degree or to do that interesting internship? I would say not only that you definitely do, it's not a rush, but in terms of distinguishing yourself and making your CV look interesting, it's actually probably a really great idea. We're very keen to see that people have got something to them. They've got a spark or an interesting experience that's going to make them stand out. And so if you're thinking, oh, is it wise for me to take a year to travel or go and do this interesting scheme or internship? It almost certainly is if you're tempted by it. So I would say do kind of think about those interesting schemes or sort of extra points for your CV that you might be tempted by. And then the final thing I would say is, I remember finding the bar very difficult to understand. The law firms are very good at kind of taking you out for dinners and promoting their VAC schemes, and it's just a little bit easier to figure out what it means or looks like to be a solicitor. Whereas the bar, again, as I said right at the start, everyone's self-employed, it's a very kind of strange little world. And I would just emphasise that things like this, where you get to hear people talking frankly about their practices, or going on mini pupilages. I remember on my mini pupilages just kind of sitting down with like a notebook and interviewing people basically, and then over the course of talking to a few different barristers, you kind of got a sense of what the job looked like and what people were looking for. But it took quite a lot of attempts at that before you understood what the life really looked like and how you're supposed to be applying. So I would emphasise just sort of keep going, keep asking questions, and on that note, ask questions now and I will stop talking.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I completely agree with what you said. I found the bar so confusing when I was first looking into it, and it was really through just asking loads and loads of questions before I finally understood. Well, I think I now understand what it is. Right, we'll now move on to the Q&A section of this evening. I'll start with a question from Mitch. This question is directed to Daniel. What are some of your preferred sources for keeping up to date on the rapid legislation changes?
That, I think, probably has different answers when you're in practice, where it really has to be quite a big part of your life. Certainly in my practice area. If you're, so for background, Mitch is actually my drummer who's on the GDL. So he's we're in a band together, and I know that the GDL is a time when you're very time poor and probably a bit bored of the law, even if you probably wouldn't want to admit it, because it's quite an exhausting year. And I think that probably the best place to go would be law firms' websites. Really, if you think I might be interested in infrastructure work, or I might be interested in financial services, then find the firms that are sort of most prominent doing that. And we run in the team that I work in have a great podcast called Regulation Tomorrow. Maybe it's today. It changed name. So that's like a really interactive thing where people from our team at various levels talk about all sorts of stuff that's going on. All of the firms in the city publish articles all the time. We all research them really, really hard because we don't want to publicly get stuff wrong. So they're probably quite a good place to start, and that's probably what I would go for.
Thank you, Daniel. This next question is from Ryan. I think, Charlotte, you touched upon this briefly, but if anyone else wants to have a go at it. People always talk about the competitive nature of commercial law. Would you characterize that environment as hostile or more as a needed environment in order to establish the quality of work demanded?
Maybe I'll answer that. I think Charlotte really summed up very well how collegiate most chambers are within themselves and how much support is given from the top of chambers to the bottom of chambers to people there. But I've found that generally the bar, although obviously it is competitive, we're all essentially competing for the same work, I guess. And then when we're against each other in court, that is by its very nature confrontational and competitive. I've actually found that the area of work that you operate in, you get to know the other barristers at other chambers as well as at your own, and there's a real sense of camaraderie. And that's one of the many things I've enjoyed about the career, is getting to know people across the field, different chambers, different ways of doing things. And you find it's a little world that you get to know people and you pick things up from each other. And actually there are schemes that go across chambers to support people. So there are mentoring schemes that are run by the specialist bar associations, whether that's ComBar or Tech Bar, and those sorts of organisations are designed to help the younger barristers as they move up through the career and to support them in all the different challenges they face. So actually, although it's competitive to get in and it's competitive when you're opponents, once you take the wig off, even if that's just metaphorically, there's actually a wonderful community sense and camaraderie at the bar, which I think is enjoyable. So I hope that puts your mind at rest, Ryan, that it's all a nest of vipers. It's very far from that.
Can I jump in on that one as well? Because I think when people talk about the competitive nature, I think it's exactly what Lynne said. You know, a lot of people are chasing jobs, and we get that, and a lot of people are applying for jobs. Actually, when you get into a firm, if the firm or the chambers or wherever it is deeply competitive internally, I think there's probably something wrong, and there's something negative going on there, because actually the truth is we're all there to do the best job possible for the client. And if actually you're looking over your shoulder trying to kill the other trainee next door, it's just sort of, it's deeply pointless and utterly stupid. And so, and that is the distinction, I'm afraid, between sort of university and moving into the workplace. I don't mean to sound patronizing, but your work is no longer for you. Your work is actually for the greater good of your team and therefore your client. And to the extent you do exhibit competitive tendencies, you won't survive and you won't succeed, because the last thing people want is sharp-elbowed people internally. Now, you might need to be robust, and you might need to be robust with the other side, and you might need a negotiation to be robust. But if that's a competitive nature internally, I suggest you probably leave that firm and find somewhere a bit nicer.
And
or that.
Sorry, Robert, and just to kind of go off something you mentioned earlier about work-life balance not being so neat, because, you know, when you're at work, you still do need to have a life and kind of enjoy what you do. I think that really fits into this question, because personally, you know, I really like everybody I work with. You know, my supervisor on my first team, who I now work with quite a lot, I've met his whole family, I've met his kids, you know, and I think to the extent you were competitive, you know, that just wouldn't be conducive to a long career in the team. And you know, still being on the junior end myself, I've lost count of the amount of times that I've, you know, picked up the phone to other people in my intake who are also in the same team, said, you know, I've been given this task, haven't the foggiest, have you done this before? And, you know, quite often the answer is yes. And, you know, this is what I did, this is where you can find useful precedents, here's something I did. And that works both ways. And I just think it makes, you know, life a whole lot easier.
Thank you all for that. Well, I think we might only have time for one more question. I'm just going to go to Harry Robinson's question. This is aimed at Robert, but if any of the other solicitors want to chime in, feel free. What would you recommend for applicants to focus on in a cover letter to distinguish themselves from others, especially for vacation scheme applications?
Oh, so I get in a lot of trouble about this one. And so take it with a pinch of salt if actually you completely disagree with me. But can you stop worrying about this? Can you just stop sweating this one? You will present yourself as yourself. You will tell us who you are. You will lay out your life and you'll tell us honestly and factually why you've reached certain decisions about what you want to do. The question of what stands out more than something else is just impossible to answer. And to be quite frank, I don't care. I don't care whether someone loves particular types of legislation or really enjoys cooking, or someone established a knitting circle, or someone else loves Lego. What we want to do is see the curiosity that you have and the passion and the interest in what you're doing. And that is completely individual for you. There is no formula for this. And you've got to stop imagining that we have some random tick box of words, and particularly long words. Don't need long words in a covering letter. You don't need to sound like you've got, you've swallowed a dictionary. That's a better way of putting what I was about to say. But equally, you need to be professional. And that's that balance. But please don't try and play some sort of role for us, because you'll get really bored and really tired doing that for 2 or 3 years, and it will just be really dull. Sorry, and that is not, I mean, I know I get in a lot of trouble because apparently there is some formula, but there really isn't. I read all the CVs that come into Social May. I read thousands of CVs a year, and that is my advice that I would give.
I know it's been said it's the last question, but given there was some talk about the bar not being very clear and accessible, and since we're on applications, I think we should answer who are mini pupilages targeted for? What step in our career do we have to be in to apply? A mini pupilage is just a different version of a VAC scheme, and it's usually 1 or 2 days in chambers, and it's designed to give you an insight into what barristers do. And to see what a chambers is like from the inside and sort of what work we do. Different chambers have different policies on mini pupilages. So what you need to do is you need to go to chambers websites to find out. For instance, in my set, and I think that's quite common across the commercial sets, you would have to be in your 2nd year of your law degree if you're a lawyer. That is so that you have some understanding of what is a contract, what is tort law, because otherwise if we try and explain what we work on, you might not necessarily understand. And for those of the GDL, we would typically say you should have done a sort of term on the GDL. So that would, you know, for instance, you apply in October, November when you're on the GDL, and then you would do your mini pupilage in January, February. Now, for those who are saying, oh, well, COVID, at least my chambers, and I'm sure lots of others do that as well, we're doing virtual mini pupilages at the moment. So it's not quite the same. You don't get to sit with me, but you get, you know, one of us for a sort of virtual coffee, and it's basically a one-on-one session where for 1 hour or 2 hours, you can fire questions at us, and we would typically do what we've done here, explain the sort of work we do. So I hope that has answered that and demystified what a mini pupilage is.
Thank you, Sophie. That's really helpful, actually, because yes, especially right now, I know a lot of chambers have suspended their mini pupilages. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you to all the speakers so much for giving up your time today and answering our questions. I'm just going to hand over back to Asha now for some final remarks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the speakers for what has been incredible insights into your practice areas, into your respective careers. And thank you to all of the attendees as well. Just wanted to finish off by saying this is the InState's first event, hopefully of a packed and really, really engaging calendar over the next year or so. I would encourage every single person here to share their experience at the event today on LinkedIn, on Instagram, whatever social media you guys use. Please encourage friends and your social network to also engage with InState, sign up as members, come to our events. We have an event tomorrow we have a finance event tomorrow with the ex-managing director of Deutsche Bank. And we have quite a good range of events scheduled for the next couple of months. So please do engage with us, stay connected with us. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing where InState goes in the next couple of months ahead. Thank you also to Natalie and her team. You know, you guys have done outstandingly. What a great event tonight has been. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you all soon, hopefully at another event. And thank you. So back to Natalie, unless you have anything else to say, Natalie.
I think you summed it up very nicely there. I did want to say next week, Law are hosting another event. We'll be doing an event about in-house lawyers versus firm lawyers. So this is for anyone who's thinking of becoming a solicitor. the week after that, we're going to do a short session on the employed bar as well. So stay tuned to in-state social media, to your emails, and you'll get more information on that very soon. Thank you everyone for coming today.
Thank you. Good luck everybody with your applications.